Welcome to My Stable Relationship, an equestrian performance podcast where we will deep dive into the mindset and management challenges of ourselves and of our peers. Our discussions will allow you to learn from experts, encourage you to set audacious goals, overcome challenges, and develop actionable plans. Ready? Let's do this. Hello everyone, and welcome back to My Stable Relationship. So I wanted to start this week by sharing with you that I filmed some slow motion videos of Bo yesterday. And I do this so that I can undertake like a monthly analysis of how his hooves are growing, how they're looking, and how they're landing on the ground. And more importantly, I am so absolutely thrilled to announce that for the first month ever, he is landing flat or parallel to the ground with all 4 feet, and he is barefoot. So for all of you hoof rehab lovers out there, yes, I would ideally like my horses to land heel first, but I am totally cool to accept flat-footed Bo at this stage given his journey. So Bo was diagnosed with bilateral navicular in 2014, so 8 years ago this year. And we actually didn't think he'd survive to be 20 years old like he is today. And we certainly never thought that he could go barefoot. When he was first diagnosed, he went through all sorts of shoes with wedge pads and then transitioned into bar shoes. But I just always felt like he was always sore and always limited in his movement. And I was watching his heels become progressively underrun and his toes were becoming longer and longer. And it was really stressing me out. So about 2 years ago, I decided to transition him to barefoot. And to be honest, I was really desperate. The shoeing didn't feel like it was working for him. And I didn't like the line that I kept getting fed from some of my professionals at the time, that we would just keep shoeing until it was too hard for him and then we'd put him to sleep. And yeah, no, thank you. So let me be the first to tell you that transitioning to barefoot and taking over his hoof care myself has been a very long and very stressful road. And he was not immediately sound. There were days where he was so footsore in the paddock. I was genuinely worried that if someone saw him from the road, if he was in the paddock at the front of my farm, then there would be some serious questions coming my way about how I'm treating my horses. And when I say barefoot, he has also now had periods where we've had to keep him in boots and foam pads, and another period where he suffered some really significant white line disease and some thrush. And I genuinely didn't know if he would recover from that. But he has been out of the boots or not so reliant on the boots for a few months now. And yesterday, it brought me great joy to film a horse who was walking evenly, tracking up, and landing flat instead of toe first. And in fact, on a few steps, he was so nearly giving me a heel first landing. And I cannot even begin to explain how excited I am. And I think the really important reminder for this week is the need to celebrate the small wins and the really small milestones along our journey. So I could totally ignore this win and aim to be celebrating when his heels have grown out or when he's no longer sore over rocky surfaces or whatever future goal I might have. But part of keeping our motivation and our excitement about anything in life is that we need to celebrate as we go. So I just want you to pick one small thing, anything. It could be that you had a lovely breakfast, or that the birds were calling out to you while you were drinking your coffee, or that you managed to maintain a more consistent rising trot yesterday, or that your horse whinnied at you in the paddock, whatever. I want you to pick a small win and just take a moment to really feel grateful and really reflect on how that made you feel. And I want you to make sure that you are celebrating those small wins along the way. And if you are interested and if you would like to celebrate with me about Bo's slow motion videos and his current hoof photos, I will make sure to have them uploaded to the blog within the next week. And the blog can be found on my website, journeyofequine.com.au/blog, but I'll put the link in the show notes. So this week's topic is all about who we are seeking advice from. And before we even get into the discussion about who you should be taking advice from, I actually want to start with just calling out the difference between advice and opinions, because we all know that there are many unsolicited opinions constantly on offer these days, particularly with the internet and with social media. So, the very clear difference is that advice is based on knowledge, experience, or industry expertise. Opinions are based on what someone thinks and not what they know. Advice is based on knowledge, experience, or industry expertise, and opinions are based on what someone thinks and not what they know. And if we look at the broad groups of people that you would normally get advice or opinions from, this would be like your friends, your family, people at work, or experts. And there may be others like people at your barn or whatever, but these are just kind of the common categories. And depending on what you're asking about, I want you to be very aware that the categories of friends, family, and even people at work are more than likely to give you opinions rather than advice. And again, it's because it's based on what they think rather than what they know or have expertise in. And this is totally fine. And you can, by all means, accept opinions rather than advice. But I want you to be aware that this is what you might be doing. Okay, so before you ask for advice from someone, I want you to deep dive into assessing why you want or why you feel that you need advice. Lots of my clients will tell me that they want or need advice about a certain topic because they don't know the answer. It's the most common reason that I hear. And here's the deal. We've already learned in the trial and error episode that for most circumstances, there is no definitive right or wrong answer. Yes, there are certainly shorter paths to the same destination, but there is no definitive right or wrong answer. And if that is true in most cases, then there are actually some underlying mindset reasons why you keep saying that you don't know the answer, and why, in some cases, you refuse to try and seek the answer by yourself. I suggest that you are seeking advice or you feel you need the advice, often because you are either looking for validation, looking for assurance, or avoiding discomfort. So let's go through those three things. Looking for validation means that you have a deep down desire to have someone else's approval or agreement with what you're going to do next. And our brains seek this out because they want us to be part of the group, accepted and included. To our brains, being on the outer of a group, doing something different, is anxiety inducing and a reason to panic. So, as an equestrian example, I really felt this when Rio had injured himself and could no longer event or show jump. And I wanted a new horse, but I wanted to get straight back into the big jumping ring, the like 1 meter plus ring. And so I found Joe, who was a previous meter 40 show jumper, but had been turned out in a paddock for nearly a year at the age of 14. Interesting, right? Nearly suspicious. Now, whether or not to purchase Joe is a decision that I could have 100% made by myself. But I sought the advice of my show jumping instructor because I was seeking validation that I was doing the right thing. I was hoping that I'd be accepted straight back onto the show jumping team and able to compete in the big show jumping ring again. I on purpose avoided asking my dad for advice on this same issue. So, my dad is also a horse person and a former competitive rider, and he would have told me, absolutely not. We do not buy old show jumpers who have been turned out in the paddock for nearly a year. It's too risky. I think his advice would have been buy a young one and bring it up the grades the right way. So I avoided my dad and I went seeking the person who would give me validation for my decision. It's nearly like I had already made the decision to purchase Joe, right? Based on who I sought advice from. So just watch your brains. They are super sneaky. Number 2 is seeking assurance. And seeking assurance is when you are looking for an absolute. You are looking for a definite yes or a definite no. And again, you are doing this because it makes your brain feel way better about the decision that you're about to make. If you seek assurance, you are looking for a guarantee for the truth or for the right or wrong answer. So, as an example for you, when Rio injured himself, after my vet in my hometown and we had been through several months of box rest and small yard rest with no success. He was still lame. I floated Rio a couple of hours away to see our Olympic team vet. I took him to this vet because he is the best of the best and he specializes in lameness for sport horses. This is exactly the expert I was wanting to seek advice from. But when the diagnosis of a ruptured collateral ligament was given to me, I still felt that this wasn't enough to satisfy me because, and I didn't know this at the time, but what my brain was seeking was not a diagnosis or advice to move forward. What my brain was seeking was assurance, a definite yes or no answer. So, what I actually wanted to know was specifically whether or not Rio would ever heal, whether or not he would compete again, whether or not I should put him to sleep. And obviously, no vet, no matter their specialization, can give that to me. Nothing is guaranteed like that. No one could possibly know at that point how he would heal or if we should put him to sleep or not yet, if he would ever be rideable again. It just wasn't possible. But my brain went into an absolute spiral and a meltdown because the one thing I wanted was assurance. And I had come to the best expert that I had access to, and I still didn't get assurance. It's interesting, hey? And number three is avoiding discomfort. So, this is when you seek advice, hoping that someone else will make the decision for you. It's kind of like being in the hope that someone else will pick the path for you or that someone else will narrow down the options for you. And I, in particular, want you to watch out for this one because it is your brain's way of staying comfortable and avoiding feelings. And if the path doesn't work out according to what the other person advised, your brain will use this as an opportunity to pin the blame on that other person. It's like you avoided the initial discomfort, you followed blindly advice from someone else, and then your brain gives you permission to blame that person if it doesn't work out as you'd hoped. And this is such a massive one in the equestrian and in the animal industries. Let's say you twist words and you ask your vet what they would do if they owned your horse. And based on their response, you decide to put your horse to sleep. Your brain will default to blaming your vet should you ever be in doubt of the decision. If you enter a show jumping round because your instructor advised that you could, and you have several refusals and you get eliminated, I guarantee your brain will be angry at your show jumping instructor. Our brain seeks advice, hoping that someone will say something that kind of sounds sort of like a decision in order for us not to have to make that decision ourselves. It is such a sneaky strategy. But I also want you to be really clear about what outcome you are seeking before you ask for any advice. So I want you to be as specific as you can about the outcome, and this will help you narrow down your questioning and narrow down who you are going to ask. So you could ask your body worker what exercises you can do for your horse, right? Or you can be thoughtful and specific and ask your body worker what exercises you can do to strengthen your horse's sacroiliac region because your horse has had some pain over the last 3 to 4 weeks. You could also tell your body worker straight up that you want to do the exercises from the ground and that you can spend 3 days each week practicing with your horse. Imagine how much more productive we would be and how much more information we would be able to gather if we were super clear like this. So, let's just summarize what we've talked about. Before you even ask for advice, I want you to dig deep on what you are hoping to gain from asking. Is it validation? Is it assurance? Are you avoiding discomfort and looking for someone to make the decision for you and someone to pin the blame on? I also want you to be really clear on the outcome that you're seeking and make the question you're asking as specific as possible before going out and asking for their advice. If you aren't careful about what you want from the advice, what you're hoping to gain, or the outcome that you're seeking, the risk is that you will end up asking advice from too many people or asking the wrong people. And asking for advice can either stifle your progress or it can help you take the next step in your journey. But that's really up to you and how you seek that advice. So, based on all of that, I'm going to propose a system that you can use to narrow down who to take advice from. But bear in mind, this is just about where to get the advice from. And I think we could do a whole nother episode on how to actually analyze that advice. And obviously, because of the theme of seeking advice today, I want you to know that you can take or leave what I've said today as you wish, which is kind of fun, right? So I propose that there are only three groups of people who you should take advice from. Number one is experts. Number two is people who have achieved success in that area or are where you want to be. And number three, someone who has given you advice that you've resonated with previously. So let's have a quick chat about these. Number one, experts. So this seems like a fairly obvious one. In general, if you need advice on hoof care, please ask your farrier or your trimmer. If you need advice on your horse's teeth, please ask your horse dentist. If you need advice on your saddle, please ask your saddle fitter. Seems fairly logical. But please don't ask anyone who isn't an expert in that area. That is just you gathering an opinion, and it's also you wasting your time and your energy. Another really important thing here is please don't ask experts for advice outside of their field. So if they're really, really good, they will actually stop you and tell you when you've asked for something that's outside of their field of expertise. But for example, I'm probably not going to ask my farrier advice on my horse's kissing spine. And yes, I know that he might absolutely have some useful things to say about it, and maybe it has an impact on posture and hoof performance. But look, that's probably not exactly what I wanted to know anyway. And this is all about reducing your inputs, not wasting your time and energy, and making sure that you direct your question to the best person to give that advice. Remember too, there are different levels of expert. So, for example, you can take your horse to the general vet clinic, or you can go see a specialist. Who you choose all depends again on your original specific question. Number two, someone who has achieved success in that area or is where you want to be. So, there is this great quote from Michael Hyatt that says, "You should never take advice from people who aren't getting the results that you want to experience." So perhaps you wouldn't consider seeking advice about your cross country run from someone who normally rides show horses. Or as a show rider, you wouldn't take advice on preparing horses from an eventer. And fair enough too, I was absolutely shocking at preparing my horses for the dressage leg in particular when I was competing. Maybe you wouldn't want to ask advice on jumping technique over 140 if the person has never jumped over 60 centimeters themselves. Maybe you'd be better off seeking the advice of a Grand Prix show jumper instead. The point is, you need to consider whether you like the life or the results of the person prior to asking their advice. If you don't see them as having achieved success in that specific area, or if they're not where you want to be, maybe there is someone else that you could target for advice instead. And number three, you can ask advice of someone who has given you advice that you resonated with previously. So we all have that person who has given us good advice in the past, or we maybe see as a mentor or someone that we respect deeply. Maybe the advice that they gave was really thought provoking, or it was like an out there opinion. Maybe they have a different view of the world compared to you. By all means, go for it. But again, just be careful to limit who you ask and for what reason. And before you ask someone in one of those three groups for advice, I just want to caveat a few things or give you a few final warnings about who to seek advice from. Number one, everyone has biases. And this is not always a bad thing, but it is important to keep in mind that the experiences that people have had before influence the advice that they give you. So, for example, if your friend recently had a young off the track thoroughbred diagnosed with kissing spine, perhaps it is going to be unlikely that they would give you a good review or good advice about young off the track thoroughbreds. Number two, watch out for friends and family. These are the two groups most prone to just agreeing with everything you say and jumping in your story. And what I mean by that is that old quote about if you are in jail and you look to your left and right, it's your friends in there with you. Same thing. They are likely to agree with you, jump into your story. They're likely to egg you on. This is just how friends and family work for the most part. So, number three, sometimes the best place to get advice is from a complete stranger or a coach type relationship because they can offer an objective rather than subjective advice. And they can look at this situation from an outside perspective. They're also not worried too much about hurting your feelings because they're actually getting paid to call you out on these types of things, unlike your friends and family who want to maintain that close personal relationship with you. Number four, sometimes the best place to get advice is from yourself. Sometimes we over rely on external sources of advice when, if we just get specific and purposeful about the advice that we want, we might find our own way to the solution. And then my last caveat is that even when someone gives you advice, you do not need to accept it. It is up to you to analyze it and to work out if it aligns with your values or not, or if it feels right to take forward. And here's a great story for you. When I first got Rio, he was a bit difficult and he was quite the rearer. So when things didn't go right, or he didn't understand, or he spooked, or whatever, his instinct was to go upwards. And I took him to my dressage trainer at the time, and she gave me some unsolicited advice. And I say advice because she was the dressage expert that I had chosen to help me improve my scores for eventing, right? And she said to me that I should take Rio to the doggers and that we could find me a better horse, a nicer horse for dressage that would get higher marks. That's literally the advice she gave me. But I analyzed it and I decided it didn't align with my values. And there's this beautiful quote from, I think it's the book, The Richest Man in Babylon. And it says, advice is the one thing that is freely given away, but watch that you take only what is worth having. Advice is the one thing that is freely given away, but watch that you take only what is worth having. So, just to summarize that, I propose that there are only three groups of people who you should seek advice from. Number one, experts. Number two, someone who has achieved success in that area or is where you want to be. And number three, someone who has given you advice that you've resonated with previously. So, your actionable takeaway from today is a bit of a step-by-step process. The next time you think you are going to ask for advice, I want you to dive deep into what exactly are you wanting to know. So, like we talked about, get specific, draw out as much as you can the detail around your question, and you might find that you can start to answer some of it for yourself just based on what you draw out. If you decide you're still going to ask for advice with your specific question, that's great. I just want you to assess why you are seeking the advice. And I just want you to check if it's for validation, assurance, or to avoid discomfort. And if it's not, and you still need to seek advice after that assessment, excellent. Next step, I want you to really narrow down the person or few people that you're going to ask. Are they experts? Are they someone who has achieved success in that area? Are they someone who is where you want to be? Or are they someone who has given you advice that you've resonated with previously? Narrow it right down. This is a targeted approach. And the more specific you get on the question or the topic and what you're looking for advice on, the better you can narrow this down as to who you are going to ask. And lastly, I just want you to have an idea of how many people you can seek advice from before it's too much and it's too overwhelming for you. So for me, when I went to ask for advice previously, I would ask maybe 2 to 5 people. And what I've learned is that that is too many people for me. I end up with too many different opinions, different options, different ways of doing things, and it's overwhelming. And it means I might never actually decide on a path forward and take steps towards my goal. So these days, I really specify what I'm asking. I really narrow down to experts or to others that I'm going to ask. And I try to stick with one person only, plus myself. And from there, I'll see if I can make a decision. Only if I can't make a decision at that stage will I maybe ask another person. This is such a calculated approach. And I really encourage you to just have an idea or a feel for how many people you can seek advice from before it's too much or too overwhelming for you. And then make sure you stick to that number. Let's do that quote that I love one more time. Advice is one thing that is freely given away, but watch that you take only what is worth having. My goal with this podcast is to use this type of mindset and management work to help you more effectively rehabilitate or train your horse. We will balance your life inside and outside of the arena so that you can find your version of a stable relationship. And with that, I just want to say a huge thank you for tuning in today. Please subscribe to the podcast on whichever platform you're listening to it. And you can also follow along on the socials at Journey of Equine. The links will be in the show notes. Have a wonderful week, everyone, and I'll speak to you soon. Thank you so much for listening. My goal is to help you more effectively train or rehabilitate your horse by focusing on your mindset and management, both inside and outside of the arena. If this sounds like something you'd like one-on-one help with, or if you'd like to follow along for more, come and join me on Instagram or Facebook at Journey of Equine. The links will be in the show notes. Have a great week, everyone.